Ukraine says it has recaptured territory in the east from Russia in a major counter-offensive. Could this be a turning point in the conflict? Hello, I'm Anton, and this is The Heat. Over the weekend, the Ukrainian military claimed to have recaptured big chunks of Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine's northeast and southern regions. Moscow has responded by saying everything is going according to plan and that it will achieve its goals. After 7 months, though, is the conflict entering a new phase? CGTN's Chapman reports from Kyiv.
For the second time in 2 days, the region of Kharkiv was plunged into darkness once again in what officials there say was an attack on the power plant as well as water facilities in the city, affecting the entire region and neighboring ones as well. That comes just after officials had managed to get the network back up and running for most people living in the Kharkiv region, only for the power to be taken out once again. They are gradually trying to restore it now. Officials there say that this is Russian retaliation for the significant gains that have been made by Ukraine's armed forces in the Kharkiv region over the last few days. And one official in Kharkiv says at least one civilian has been killed and a number of other ones injured in Russian attacks on Monday. Now, Russia says that it is redeploying its forces, regrouping them, moving them to the Donbass region, and indeed a Russian Ministry of Defense map showed that the forces had moved back further east out of this area that the Ukrainians say they have retaken. But officials in Moscow saying that they are still determined to press on and that they will be successful in what they call the special military operation. Now, Ukraine has claimed to have retaken some 3,000 square kilometers in the Kharkiv region, about 500 square kilometers in Kherson in the south. They credit this in part due to strategy, saying that they were going to be focusing on the south but moving their forces instead to the northeast and taking the Russians by surprise. But Ukrainian officials have also said that this is in no small part because of the help from Western nations, saying that the weaponry and the military aid that has been provided by the United States, Germany and other NATO members has played a really significant role in allowing Ukrainian forces to make this counteroffensive over the last week. But as the defense minister said in an interview on Monday, the key now will be holding these gains, consolidating them. He said it's one thing to retake territory, it's another altogether to hold it. And that is what Ukrainian officials will be focusing on in the days to come. Chapman, CGTN, Kyiv.
Well, to discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Moscow, Viktor Olevich is the lead expert at the Center for Actual Politics, a Moscow-based think tank. From North Carolina, we have Klaus Larres. He is a professor of history and international affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Here in Washington, D.C., Anton Fedyashin is a professor of history at American University. And joining us from Kyiv, we have Pavlo Kukhta. He is a former Ukrainian acting minister of the economy. Welcome to all of you to the show. And Pavlo, let me start with you. Ukraine is telling us that this counter-offensive has pushed back Russian forces in the east. Ukraine has taken over a huge swathe of territory and has retaken something like 30 or more towns. What can you tell us about the status of the conflict right now?
Look, this is the first really successful military offensive by Ukrainian forces as of today. Actually, it was a well-known fact since the start of the war in 2014. Ukrainian forces are good at defending. It's been that way for years. But there has been no major offensive operation conducted for them. So we all knew, even within Ukraine, we didn't really know how tested our troops were on the offensive. Now it is clear that they are capable of successful offensive operations. So it is definitely a major achievement on the Ukrainian side. It's about 70 kilometers deep into the Russian front line in a few days, which is, for this war, a really very fast pace. In the beginning of the war, when most of the Russian gains were made, I believe their pace was like 5 to 10 kilometers per day. So Ukrainians were pretty fast. Apparently, the headquarters, the general headquarters of Ukrainian armed forces, has found a weak point in the Russian defenses and being able to exploit that to break through and retake some territory. This does not yet, I'm careful at saying that this is a total change of dynamics in this conflict so far, but clearly this is something that we haven't seen previously. So Ukrainian offensive success, first major retake of territories, not really by Russians withdrawing, but by Ukrainians actually taking it away from them.
Right, and Pavlo, as our reporter raised the question of whether Ukraine can hold the territory that it has retaken.
Most likely, yes. Again, if you look at, and we have very ample, we live in an age of social media, so we have ample evidence of what's going on right there. If you look there, you will see that the Russians essentially fled in disarray. A lot of equipment captured that is supposed to be in the rear that usually would have been withdrawn had they been withdrawing in any kind of organized fashion. So yes, the expectations in Kyiv are that this territory will be held. Also, it's quite defensible. It's essentially Ukrainian forces have reached the river, so they're standing on the side of the river, which is quite defensible.
Okay, let's go to Moscow, to Viktor Olevich. Victor, there are some reports say that Russia was actually overstretched, that it didn't have a sufficient number of troops to hold both the south of Ukraine as well as the east, and it's calling this counteroffensive by Ukraine a minor setback, and that everything is going according to plan. In fact, the newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta reported that this was not a Russian escape, but a planned regrouping. What can you tell us?
Look, it is obvious that 6 months into this armed conflict, not everything is going according to plan. Quite a few setbacks have been suffered by the Russian military. We can remember what happened in the areas of the Kyiv and Chernihiv regions that the Russian military controlled, in some other areas that the Russian military controlled and left later on. Of course, what happened in the areas of the Kharkiv region that were under Russian military control in the past few days is a serious setback for the Russian effort in Ukraine. But what is important to understand is that Russia cannot afford to lose this conflict. A loss, a military loss for Russia would lead to untenable, absolutely untenable domestic political consequences and foreign policy consequences for Russia. Russia has a lot of weapons and it has a large army, and it can make the army that it has even larger if it wishes to do so. So it is understandable that those who support the Ukrainian side may feel excited about what happened in the Kharkiv region in the past few days, but that excitement is too premature for them, because Russia is not going to leave Ukraine, and Russia is intent on achieving at least some of its goals in Ukraine.
Yeah, Victor.
So if I were on the other side of this equation, if I were on the Ukrainian side, I would not be too excited about what has just happened in the Kharkiv region.
Yeah, okay.
The military conflict that is going on, that has been going on for half a year, is going to go on for months and perhaps years.
Okay, Victor.
Unless it is resolved in a diplomatic fashion soon.
Yeah, Victor, you say...
It was the Ukrainian side that left the negotiations that first started in Belarus and then continued on in Turkey.
Okay, Victor,
under the auspices of the Turkish President Erdogan.
Yeah, Victor, I have a question on what you're telling us.
Those negotiations.
Yeah.
The Ukrainian side left.
Okay, Victor, just one question on what you've been telling us. You say this is a setback to Russian goals. What exactly is Russia's goal?
A setback or a number of setbacks, however important they may be at this point, that they would lead to some sort of a defeat of the Russian military. That will not happen. Russia will continue with its effort until it finds a solution that in which Russia would at least not look like a defeated party in this conflict.
Okay. All right, Anton, Fedyashin, there are analysts who are describing this latest counteroffensive by the Ukrainians as a turning point in this conflict. Do you believe it is a turning point, and how big a turning point is it if it is?
I have to agree with Pavlo's very intelligent, sober analysis. It's simply too early to tell. As an historian who's read plenty of books about war, listen, we're still trying to figure out battles that happened decades and centuries ago. Look, let me give a quick rundown of positives and negatives here. First of all, the fact that the Ukrainians found this weak link in a very, very long front, over 1,000 kilometers long, gives them great credit. As Napoleon famously said, in war, the moral to the physical is as 3 to 1, and this was a very welcome boost to Ukrainian morale, especially after the Kherson offensive in the south fell flat, one can say imploded, with very little gained and massive casualties. So the Ukrainians have definitely won in morale. They have moved through territory, however, without major battles. Where the Ukrainians have come up against a professional Russian army, such as in Kherson, they've been pushed back for the most part. What they were moving through in Kharkiv, intelligently as it was done, was for the most part empty space. Several units of the Russian National Guard, the militia, and only around Izium was there the armies. That's number one, still positive for Ukraine. Number two, for those Ukrainians who have been under Russian occupation and ended up either cooperating, collaborating with them, or simply tolerating them, a lot of these people are now going to be scratching their heads. This is especially in Zaporizhia in the south and in Kherson, and wondering how long the Russians are going to be staying. They might just retreat. And this is a blow to Ukrainian morale. But we also have to look at this in the broader context. This is a war of attrition, and sustainability of military efforts is what will decide whether the Ukrainians are successful or not. And this no one can tell right now. But let me give you a quantifiable sort of contextual issue here that puts a lot of things in perspective. Ukraine's overall territory is about 603,000 square kilometers. The Russians hold roughly about a fifth of the country, which is about 120,000 square kilometers. And according to Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainians have just gained back about 2,000 square kilometers of territory. So that's about 1/60th of what the Russians hold. If they can maintain this, then they will be successful, but it's going to take an awfully long time.
Klaus, Larres, what do you make of these latest developments? Have we got to a point which could be something of a stalemate right now?
Well, I think the previous speakers downplay what has been achieved. After all, at the beginning of the war, Putin wanted to topple the Zelensky government within 3 days and wanted to conquer the entire Ukraine within 3 or 4 days. And now, you know, there's a rout of Russian soldiers in the northeast and possibly also in the south. Today we read that the Ukrainians have made territorial successes in the south as well. This is a terrible blow for the Russians. Whether it is a turning point in the war, that remains to be seen. But we were talking about the mighty Russian army, about the superiority of Russian weapons and strategy and commanders and soldiers, and all that has proven to be not true. And of course, that now goes back home. We already had a lot of bloggers criticizing Putin himself. Even council members today or yesterday in St. Petersburg and Moscow have asked for the resignation of Putin. This is something unheard of. That was supposed to be a quick war of conquest, and Russia wanted to take over the entirety of Ukraine. And now the opposite is happening. The Ukrainians are actually pushing the Russians out of Ukraine. And there is report that some soldiers in the north have actually got through to the Russian border. border. So I think one should not downplay what is happening right now. Whether it's a turning point, that is very difficult to judge, and we can only wait for the next few weeks and months. At the moment, it's not a war of attrition. A few weeks ago, it was a stalemate and a war of attrition. At the moment, it very much is the Ukrainians are in the offensive and they're pushing the Russians out. Whether that will remain the case, of course, needs to be seen. But I think all strategists, all military experts are totally surprised by this development. And of course, without Western weapons, the Ukrainians could not have achieved that. But also the resilience of the Ukrainian troops, their motivation and willpower, that also counts for an awful lot, of course.
Viktor Olevich, what do you make of that? You know, Klaus telling us there that the Russians have been pushed out by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians now hold the upper hand. And as Klaus said, Russia has been routed.
Well, Russia controls significant parts of the Ukrainian territory, and Russia is intent on achieving a solution in this conflict that will not make it look like a defeated party. And Russia is willing to use all mechanisms and instruments at its disposal, both political and military, to achieve at least that goal. It is understandable that the goals that were initially set for the special military operation are difficult to achieve at this point or in the foreseeable future. But Russia will take any and all action necessary to at least not be a defeated party. It cannot afford to be defeated in this conflict. Therefore, there are essentially, however much the Ukrainian side or the Western sponsors of Ukraine at this point may be excited about what happened in the Kharkiv region in the last several days, we have to get back to reality.
Right.
There are essentially two choices. One choice is that the Ukrainian side refuses to get back to the negotiating table with Russia, refuses to compromise, to provide at least some compromise solutions to Russia that will lead to an end to this conflict.
Viktor,
and the other choice is if the Ukrainian side does not come back to the negotiating table, this military conflict can last months and years.
Okay, Viktor, I have another question for you. It's something that Klaus raised a moment ago, in that there is pressure in Moscow for an end to this war. You know, Klaus was telling us about this petition that was being circulated. Now, this news about a petition being circulated and signed by municipal councillors in Russia was published in the Moscow Times, which is a newspaper which isn't in Moscow. It's actually based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and we know that the Netherlands is actually a NATO country. One United States television network sourced this report to Twitter. What do you know about this?
Well, the municipal deputies that you are talking about are known for their opposition, anti-government views. They have been known for that in that specific municipal area. They have been known for their anti-government views, opposition views for years. So it is not surprising that they have been very critical of the special military operation, as well as a number of other government initiatives.
Okay.
The Moscow Times, as you correctly pointed out, have little to, are not even based in Moscow. They're not. This is not a paper that's based in Russia right now. It's controlled by it's based in the Netherlands. So this particular case speaks little about the real goings on in Russia. Now, as far as the pressure, one way or another, there are quite a few Putin loyalists at this point who are in fact unhappy about how the special military operation is going. And they're not unhappy about the start of the special military operation. They are unhappy about Russia not getting, advancing more, quicker.
Okay, Viktor, I need to move on.
So the pressure on the government is applied from several sides.
Okay, I need to move back to Kyiv to Pavlo. Pavlo, one other development I want to talk about, and that is the concern over the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. That plant, of course, was taken offline on Sunday. The United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, has expressed its concerns. It's calling for a safety and security zone for the plant. The New York Times reported, without any attribution or any evidence whatsoever, that Russia might seek to connect that plant to the Russian electric grid. What can you tell us about the situation at this nuclear plant?
Well, it is right now disconnected from the Ukrainian grid, that much is true, and it's actually rather logical to expect that the Russians would try to turn it into their grid, or rather the part of the Ukrainian grid that they control. So it is generally what people expect them to do. Of course, it's not safe, and of course, it's a major security concern for everyone, not only Ukraine and Russia, but everyone in Europe. And the only solution to that is the demilitarization of the plant. And now, if you look geographically, it's actually behind a rather large lake, so it's not on any kind of front line, and the Russians can safely move their troops out of there without compromising their defenses. So it's generally totally up to the Russian force to demilitarize the plant and thus, alleviate the security concerns that everyone has. So far, they have not been willing to do that. Rather, they're using this as a kind of blackmail instrument, which tends to be a typical Russian strategy in these kinds of situations.
Okay, Anton, Fedyashin, if we look at the U.S. support for this conflict in Ukraine, the U.S. support for Ukraine, the United States Congress passed a $40 billion economic and security package for Ukraine. That was back in May. Ukraine has already received about $15 billion of that. Oh, let me correct that. We don't know how much Ukraine has received and how much has been actually sent to United States defense contractors. But do you believe that this is an open-ended commitment by the United States and that this kind of aid will continue?
From the United States, definitely. It is an open-ended commitment. The amounts of money will be spread out over time. The bonanza of this spring and summer is going to decrease. But here in Washington, both parties are committed, with some very rare exceptions, to supporting Ukraine. So the United States is going to continue supplying it with weapons, especially considering that the European supplies are actually shrinking and have been since the summer by the Europeans' own admission.
Just one point on that, Anton. You say both parties in the United States are on the same page as far as aid to Ukraine is concerned, but the United States faces formidable domestic economic challenges, doesn't it? And could that have an impact on the amount of money that's going to Ukraine?
Anand, let's see how the gas prices, react to what's going on in what will be going on in Europe this fall and winter. The United States is the least vulnerable of the immediate players in the Ukraine crisis since 2014. I mean, the least vulnerable economically. So the United States can certainly afford it. The Europeans, I'm afraid, this winter will not be able to, and the United States is going to come in to make up for that slack.
Klaus, as Anton points out, the United States is the least vulnerable, but the impact is really being felt in Europe, isn't it? I mean, could there be a tipping point in Europe at some point, especially as we get into winter, where people might start reassessing the sanctions that have been placed on Russia? They might even consider lifting some of those sanctions.
There always can be a tipping point, but I don't see it. At the moment, Britain has actually sent millions and millions of new aid to Ukraine. It's actually one of the leading countries of doing so, next to the United States. And as long as the Ukrainians are actually winning the war, at least pushing the Russians out, that of course will motivate the Europeans and tell them that their aid is not in vain, that the money they spend on Ukraine is not in vain. And the Ukrainians have already told the Germans, for example, you need need to deliver more weapons to us so we can actually continue with that offensive. And I think that is totally understood by the governments and also the peoples in Europe. Just one word about my colleague from Moscow who keeps talking about a special military operation. Of course, it's a war. It has been a war right from the beginning, and Putin will soon have to tell his own people that it is a war, and he will need to mobilize if he wants to find new soldiers for the war. So to talk about a special military operation, that's a lot of nonsense and shouldn't be done. It clearly is a very, very brutal and ruthless war.
All right, let me get Viktor to respond to that. And Viktor, if you could also respond to whether Russia is prepared for the long haul economically.
Sure, it is a war that Russia cannot afford to lose. Russia understands very well that this military conflict is not as much about Ukraine as it is about the confrontation between the collective West, NATO on the one side and Russia on the other side. And Moscow understands very well that in this confrontation, the West is the United States and its European allies are going to use all the resources that they can use to provide aid and assistance to Ukraine so that Ukraine could fight Russian forces. The aim of the United States and its NATO allies is to cause maximum damage to the Russian armed forces and to the Russian economy. This is essentially a full-scale economic war that is being waged against Russia, as well as a proxy military conflict on the territory of Ukraine. This is understood very well in Moscow. And of course, Russia is able and willing to fight for months and years in Ukraine if a diplomatic solution is not going to be found. Of course, for Western nations, this conflict is not as expensive in human life as it is for Ukrainians. Because American soldiers and British soldiers and German soldiers are not dying on Ukrainian battlefields. They're simply being the Ukrainian state is simply being financed by the West to keep on fighting.
Okay, I want to go to Pavlo. Pavlo, I've only got a minute left, less than a minute in fact. The Ukrainian President Zelensky, he'll be addressing the United Nations General Assembly next week. He'll also be talking to an industrial group here in the United States, defense contractors here in the United States. What do we expect from him?
Look, I think the messaging from Ukraine is rather clear and consistent. Ukraine is fighting this to the end. At the very least, we have to get back to the territories that we had before the Russian invasion started. And I believe a quick peace and the ceasefire is actually in anyone's interest, including the Russians, as if there is this position from the regime in Russia that they cannot afford to lose, which maybe is true for them, but probably not true for Russia.
Okay, and
a loss of Russia would be beneficial to them, but the regime might.
Okay, I'm going to have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anton in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.